Well, welcome, Brian. Nice to
thanks
meet
for
you.
having me. Yeah.
We both belong to the same club.
Plus one Flyers.
Yeah. Largest club?
Absolutely. So it is by far the largest private flying club in the world, just shy of 3,000 members.
Wow.
I'll give you a funny story. AOPA, the Airline
Yes, absolutely.
Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, it's sort of like the lobbying body for pilots. They did an article in their magazine a couple months ago, and they said, we went out and looked at flying clubs, and they range from a couple guys sharing a plane, and the largest we found was 12 planes. And we look at this at the board meeting for Plus One, we're like, 12 planes.
12 planes.
We got
The
92
largest
planes.
one they found.
Yeah, we got 92 planes at four airports here. And AOPA has never heard of us. So maybe that'll change, though, if you send them this episode.
Well, hopefully they take a look at it. That would be fantastic. Yeah, that's the wonderful thing about Plus One that I like about it is for a club, it's relatively inexpensive.
Yeah.
They do a really good job of mitigating the cost across all the planes. Of course, everything is really expensive now with fuel.
Yep.
But also, I trained and I got my pilot's license in San Diego, which is a fantastic place to learn the complicated airspace.
Oh, for sure. If you learn to fly here in San Diego, we're actually the busiest airspace in the world. Anywhere in the world, right? You think China's got 8 billion people over there, or New York maybe. No, it's Southern California. SoCal TRACON, they love to brag about this. The tower controllers come to some of our membership meetings and, give a little presentation, and they're always like, oh, yeah, we got 8 million operations a day here, and, they brag about how busy it is. But you learn to fly here, you can go anywhere and fly.
And continual practice. I'm a part-time pilot. It's recreational for me. I am a private pilot. I'm a VFR, which is visual flight rules. There's different levels of certifications that you can get.
Yeah.
I got my license in 2001, right at 9/11.
Oh man, that's great.
Funny story is, of course, everyone was freaking out, didn't know what to do with all these private pilots. So I was a student pilot, and they passed a law, a regulation for about 3 or 4 weeks that if you're a student pilot, you could fly by yourself.
Yeah.
However, if you're a newly minted pilot that's not IFR, you can't fly. So we would have to fly to Riverside to get our FAA check ride. Normally, the student pilot would fly himself there, do his check ride, pass or fail, fly himself back.
So let me get this right. You could fly yourself there, get the check ride done, but then you weren't allowed to fly yourself home because now you're no longer a student pilot.
That is correct. So I had to take my instructor with me in case I actually passed the test.
Oh, that's great.
Which I did. And I think that lasted all of about 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Then they lifted that, but it was interesting. I had to pay. I might have been one of the very few people who had to pay my instructor to go out to get my check ride, and then completely be restricted to fly after that.
Well, that sounds like the FAA.
Yeah. Well, weird times, right?
Yeah,
what are you going to do?
A couple of the hijackers trained at the club at Montgomery right here.
At the
10
club.
miles down the road. Yeah. I won't name drop the guy who did the flight instruction is still with the club today. I'm not going to name drop him because that might be awkward for him. But basically what happened is these guys came over and, back then there was no sort of Department of Homeland Security or TSA, checking all this stuff. It was, you want flight instruction? Just great. We'll teach you. So he starts teaching them. And these guys, they have absolutely no interest in learning to land the airplane. And they have no interest in getting better, right, at anything other than taking off and flying around. And their English is really poor. And as you know, part of, getting your certificate is you got to prove English proficiency, right? If you're not proficient in English, that you can't pass the check ride. So he finally, after a while, he was like, listen, man, I'm just taking your money. I don't know what you guys are doing, but I don't think we should continue working together. And it turned out, those guys were part of the 9/11 hijacking
Big red
crew.
flag nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
I took some time off in flying, and it all changed when I got my currency back, went to go take some lessons, and I'm getting passports. They needed a picture of my passport. And I was like, wow, this is, before here's my certificate. Here's my driver's license. I don't even know if they took my driver's license. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But passport, the whole thing, and a bunch of paperwork you got to fill out.
Yep.
For the, I guess for Homeland Security or FAA.
Yeah, TSA.
Yeah. So You know how you can tell a person is a pilot, right? Without even knowing?
Oh yeah, they'll tell you about it.
In the first 5 minutes. It's quite easy.
Pilots and vegans.
Pilots and vegans.
And CrossFitters,
They're going to let you know that, by the way, I have a triathlon this weekend. It's funny because one of the last podcasts we did is a good friend of mine, and he's a triathlete.
Oh, okay.
And so we were talking about his fitness journey, which is pretty interesting. Let's go into your life a little bit, if you don't mind. Yeah,
absolutely.
I like I said, I just met you. However, you came highly recommended from the club. It is a big club, so we don't run into each other, and I don't fly as often as you do. But you're an MBA.
Yes, that's what brought me to San Diego. I came out to do my MBA in 2010 because USD gave me a big scholarship, and I said, "Well, that sounds lovely." And the funny thing is, San Diego wasn't even on my map really. But in 2008, my dad had kind of a little midlife crisis, and he bought an MGB because when he was a kid, an MGB is like a little British sports car,
right?
And when he was a kid, he had one of these and wrecked it, right? So he goes on eBay and he buys one. And we live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he buys an MGB in San Diego, California. It's going to cost like $8,000 to ship the thing on a flatbed. So I say, I'll fly out and drive it back. So I fly out here in 2008 and drive an MGB across the country, and it break down like 6 times.
I was going to say, how many times did it break down?
It's funny because we had AAA when I started the trip, and then like a month after I finished the trip, AAA sent us a letter saying, we're going to kick you out. You used it too much. I had to get the car towed like 3 times. So yeah, I came out in 2008, and then as I was applying for grad schools for the MBA, right? You take a test, the GMAT, and then you just get inundated. All the schools like saying, "Oh, apply here." So you get all these mailers, and one of them that came in the mail was San Diego, and I said, "Yeah." Screw it. I'll apply there.
Not bad place for a young man.
Yeah, and it's funny because you can't. I am a big believer in this. You can't ever really see how your life is going to shape up looking forward. You sit around anxiously and plan out your life, and what am I going to do 5 years? What am I going to do 10 years? But when you're looking backwards, right, the dots just naturally connect, and you see how everything is kind of interrelated. And that trip to San Diego led me to apply to San Diego. They gave me a big scholarship, so I came out in 2010, did an MBA for 2 years, and then never left. Yeah.
They say the best way to see where you'll be next year is to look at your calendar from the previous year.
Yeah.
See what you were planning the previous year. These type of things, flying, MBA,
yep.
Obviously a bachelor's in business.
Yeah, so I was undergrad business, and now I have a finance MBA, an MBA with a finance emphasis and all that.
Well, that all takes planning, right? This is some of the things we talk about, Brian, is what it takes to be successful in whatever endeavor. And we're not talking about financial success per se, although that tends to come when you have a correct plan and a passion. And I'm very cautious with that word as well, because I have a very good definition of what that is, because with most passions comes hard work.
Yep.
And when the passion or the honeymoon period drops off, you better be willing to do the hard work.
Yep.
In order to meet those goals.
It's funny because, the 2 traits that most predict success in life, right, are intelligence. If you're smart, you're going to go far. And then right behind that is conscientiousness. Can you sit your ass down and actually work, right, and get the job done? Or are you, constantly distracted by TikToks and Twitter, and something gets a little difficult and you're like, let me just check Google News real fast, see what the election is doing.
Well, and we also hear a lot, Brian, that, there's just not enough time. I'm working my full time out. Yeah. It's amazing how much wasted time people have in their day if they don't actually budget their time. Time is one of the most valuable resources we have. It's limited, and we don't know how limited it is. And people waste it.
Yep.
And then they complain that they can't get ahead, or the American dream is dead. They can't reach their goals. Why should I go to college? It doesn't pay off. And we talked about on other podcasts about the ROI on going to college. And generally speaking, and we won't talk about the university's complicity in that and the student loan problem, but the ones that do pay off are hard work.
Yeah.
It requires you to study. It requires you to actually do not just enjoy the college experience, but get out there and bust your ass.
Yeah. I am not a paragon of time management. I am terrible at managing my time. So I'm not going to lecture anybody else on it. But I do like, I do like thinking about Warren Buffett, right? And all his billions of dollars and all these other, old wealthy people. I would be willing to bet, I don't have $1 billion, but I'd be willing to bet a lot of money that if you went to these guys and you offered them and you said, hey, you can trade your fortune and go back and be 20 again, right? I bet they would take that.
Well, they'd get their fortune back quicker.
Yeah, exactly. So I like to remind myself that I'm 41, so I'm not, I'm not 20
They
anymore.
let people get that old in the United States? My goodness, I'm surprised the government hasn't come and got you.
But I like to remind myself that I'm in ways richer than Warren Buffett, right? And so are you and anybody else is watching, right, that has more time. Because Warren Buffett, he's sitting around thinking, man, most of my days are behind me now. I'm kind of at the end. I got all these billions of dollars, but, what would you give to have another decades of runway ahead of you, right? To see where
and it's
things
exciting,
go.
right?
Yeah.
It's exciting to bite the apple of life when you have that optimistic projection.
Yeah.
And knowing that you have agency in your own life. You can't, and throw the rules out. Well, God, how old are you again? 42?
41. I'm not 42.
God,
I'm not
41.
42. I'm 41.
Jeez, I know.
Yeah.
God, again, I can't believe it. No, I'm just joking.
I got to start doing the math. Actually, I've reached the age.
You forget.
Yeah, I'm like, am I 40? No, I'm 83. Yeah, I'm 41. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm 52, and it's why people ask, and I'm like,
yeah, exactly.
yeah, I think it's 50. Am I 53? Am I 51? But the rules. Society sets all these rules for us, right? They set up these obstacles, and age is one of them. Oh, you're too old. You're 41. You can't become a pilot. Or whatever your obstacle is in life, that holds you back. And people will absorb that, internalize it, and use it as a reason to not succeed.
Yeah.
So you get your MBA in finance.
Yep.
That's tough.
I was always pretty good at school. So I don't want to brag and say, this was so easy for me. It was work, right? It's exactly
Sure.
what you said. I spent a lot of time doing a lot of work and cases and all this stuff that you do for MBA. But I don't want to compare it to, when I think about things that are hard, I think about, people that are mining coal or, doing farm work or military guys, over here deployed around the world. That to me is hard, right? Sitting in an air-conditioned room, writing out some equations and doing tests and stuff. It's tedious because it's work, but it's not in the same ballpark.
Your body's not hurting.
Yeah,
Your butt might be hurting at the end of the
You're
day.
Yeah,
But
you're
your
not sacrificing stuff. Like these people are away from their families for months,
Yeah.
years on end, right? I have a good friend who's in the Navy, and he got deployed on the ship right after his son was born, right? So he missed this whole 8 months of his that is sacrifice. That's harder than what I was doing.
Sacrifice and hard work.
Yep.
And there's a lot of people that do that. They're the backbone of this country. We talk about the infrastructure is built on the backs of mostly men in this country that keeps this thing together, keeps this thing working that we call American society. The buildings, the trains, the airplanes,
The roads, the sewers.
everything is hardworking, unappreciated people that just go unnoticed.
Yep.
One of the things that we try to do is find people that nobody knows who have lived extraordinary lives, to give people hope that, hey, what they're seeing on social media is crap.
Oh, yeah.
And
For
it's
sure.
fake.
Yep.
And it's clickbait. And it's all that nonsense. But you can live a fulfilled life if you just take that first step and you get out there and go for it. Set goals.
You know what I should do? I should rent out my airplane for influencers to come take photos in front of. They do that in LA, the Gulfstream. You can go sit in a Gulfstream and take some photos while it's just in a hangar.
Yeah, they'll have plane tickets made for you for, Dubai or wherever you're going, champagne. We've talked about how most of what you see out there that people are comparing. What's sad, Brian, is that a significant portion of the youth are the highest levels of depression, anxiety. There's this concept that the American dream is dead. In their mind, it's instantaneous. They're seeing these, 20-something-year-olds, that are portraying a billionaire lifestyle.
Yeah.
When all they did is they're paying it for the hour so that they can get some click and and get some traction online. It's sad, but the reality is it's not dead. And the secret is hard work.
Yeah, for sure. That's never going to change, right? If somebody is willing to outwork you, then they can do an end run around you.
That's it.
And come out ahead, you know?
It's who's going to have the most perseverance
Yep.
and the clearest vision of going forward. So you come out of MBA school. You went to USD,
Yes. Yep.
and you come out of USD finance degree.
Yep.
Were you already studying? When was that? 2012?
So that was 2010 to 2012. I graduated in May of 2012. Yeah.
Were you already studying to be a pilot, or were you already a pilot?
No. So flying is very expensive, right? And
Really?
Yeah. So I never had the money to do it when I was younger. I had to wait until I made some money to be able to afford it. But I came from like a long lineage of aviators. My dad is an airline pilot. He was fleet captain at American. And my mom is the oldest of 7. And all my uncles on her side are all airline pilots and A&P mechanics and flight instructors. My mom and dad met through flight instruction, right? My dad was working as a CFI at a flight school that my mom's dad owned, which is a funny story. But, so I have this, and my grandfather was an airline pilot. So, long lineage of flying.
Well, pilots like to talk about flying, too,
Yeah,
so you
exactly.
probably heard about it your whole life.
Yep. So I grew up around it, but couldn't afford it until later. So coming out of MBA school, between your MBA school is 2 years, right? And between the two, you're supposed to do a summer internship.
Okay.
And, you're supposed to go apply to places that you might get a job at after you graduate. This is the way it works, right? Because what you're really paying for in the MBA is relationships, a school and a network and a good old boy kind of handshake. I'll hire you after you come out, right? And I did that. I played that game. I went around and I did some interviews for internships during that summer. And I'll never forget it. I actually got very, very lucky because I went to a finance somewhere over in Carlsbad. There's a firm, I forget the name of it. But I go in there and I do this interview, and the guy and I are talking for like 45 minutes, an hour about all this stuff. And finally, he looks at me and he goes, "All right, Brian." I pull up McDonald's stock and I find that it's trading at $80 per share. How do I know if that's the right value? Right? Very simple question.
Okay.
And what he wants to hear me say is two things. There's two ways to value a stock, right? You can either go look at Burger King and see what, it's called comparables, right? So you look at Burger King and Chick-fil-A and you go, all right, well, these ones are worth this. And then you make some adjustments for, all right, they're this size. We got to scale it back by this amount. You do that. Or what you can do is you can go to McDonald's and you say, all right, McDonald's is going to make some cash. Let's estimate all the cash McDonald's is going to make for the next 10 years. And then what is the present value of that cash? That's how you value the stock, right?
Okay.
And I did not do that. I went into the weeds about all of the fine-tuned little adjustments you have to make. I start talking technical details. And this guy is sitting across the table and his face is just going, right? He's just looking at me more and more weird. And I'm like, this is the stuff I would do. And so finally, we shake hands and I don't get the job. I don't get the job because I got lost in the weeds here when he wanted the super basics. But that turned out to be the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because what I was doing on the side at the time was building an app, a Mac app for building websites. It helps professional web developers build websites faster. It's called CodeKit. And I had not launched it yet. It was still just a weekend side project. I was working on it on nights and weekends while I was in grad school. And when I didn't get that finance internship, I said, well, screw it. I got to have some money. I got like $2,000 left in my checking account. Rent is $1,000, so I got to do something. And so I launched this app. I put it up for sale, and it went on to be a phenomenon. It was a big success, and that's what paid for the flying and all the fun since then. So I am really thankful that guy did not hire me, right? Because if I had gotten hired by that, I'd have been paid a measly, little internship salary that summer. And then I probably would have had a 9 to 7 p.m. finance job afterwards when I graduated.
Locked in.
Exactly. And I would have had $50,000 in student loan debt and, a salary of, I don't know, $70,000, $80,000 coming out of grad school there. Never would have had time to fly or the resources to do that. So that guy telling me no was the best thing that could have happened to me.
These stories are so common when you hear people get caught. They get put on a life path for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
Could be that is what they thought would pay the bills. Perhaps it's family saying, hey, you need to go into finance or you need to go into real estate, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But on the side, you're sitting there, I'm enjoying programming these apps. This is
Yeah.
something, I mean, obviously you really had a passion for it because you're taking your spare time to do it.
Well, I had a free app before that. Before I went to grad school, I was working as a web developer, right?
Okay.
And so I was building websites for clients and things. And I built a little free app to help out with that. And then the customers of that app, they didn't pay me anything, but that got used like by a million people.
Okay.
And so I got all these emails from them saying, hey, would you do one that does this? Would you do one that does this? So they were literally like beating me in the face. The market was beating me in the face with this idea to build an app and charge some money for it. And it took me years to finally go, oh, yeah, I should do that.
Yeah.
And that's what led to CodeKit, so
And it's called what?
CodeKit.
CodeKit.
Yeah.
Is it still available?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's still going strong. I updated it just a few weeks ago. It has been running for almost 13 years now, so...
So that's a great success story. I love it.
Yeah.
And it's funny because you said earlier in the podcast, it's hard to project tomorrow,
Yeah.
but by looking backwards, the path then looks clear.
Yep.
And not getting hired was a catapult towards something even bigger and greater.
Yeah. Which is hard. It's hard to see in the moment, right? Because in the moment, you leave that and you're like, oh, I blew that interview. I'm so stupid. And I was supposed to be good at finance. Like out of my MBA cohort, I was good at finance. I aced all the tests and stuff. So you leave there and you're just feeling like, man, maybe I'm an imposter. This isn't for me. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know. I moved clear across the country because my dad bought a sports car. This is the stupidest thing I've ever done. And then, just give it time. Give it time, and the dots are going to connect.
Did you interview for any other finance jobs, or was it a one and done?
No, that was the only finance job I did. I applied to some other ones and, briefly kind of flirted. You do the initial kind of like phone chats and stuff. That was the only one where I went in and, sat down because we had done like an hour-long phone chat, and then you come into the office and you sit down with him and the HR. There was like 3 different interviews and stuff. And when I left that one, I was just so demoralized. I said, I can't, I'm not doing this again. You're basically in there like begging, please hire me, please feed me, please anything. I'll take $10. It's just demeaning.
The interview process today is crazy. My son is an electrical engineer, and he always wanted to work for Tesla, and he applied their 7-step interview process.
Yeah.
And took almost a year.
Yeah.
To go through all of these interview processes. He did succeed. But it's grueling. And the other thing that he had mentioned is how these big companies evaluate resumes now.
Yeah.
People get put through computers.
Yep.
And they spit out the ones that, I don't know if they're using AI or some sort of a software program, but they spit the ones out and kick that are no good, and then forward the ones to HR that may get a phone call.
That's one of the things I really hated. It's been a long time since I've had to interview for a job, right? But one of the things I really hated was these places wouldn't even take your resume in whatever format you wanted, right? Because I had a nicely designed, all custom laid out, looked like $1 million resume. And then they go, all right, well, here's our website. Upload, copy and paste your text, throw it in here, and you're going to look just like everybody else, right? So it's just a meat grinder. It's like LinkedIn. I despise LinkedIn because it's just a template. It's like every single person on LinkedIn is just another cog in the machine. There's no uniqueness. There's no personality. It's just, here are my skills. Here are the people that endorse me for these skills.
You don't have a way to stand out. And I always say the only time you're perfect in the world is when you're born and on your resume.
Yeah.
And and you look at all these, it's just paper. Back, I'm a Gen Xer. Back in the day, you knocked on doors, asked if they're hiring. I mean, even at some big companies, are you hiring? Yes, fill out this resume, fill it out. Our HR manager will be with you in a minute. Yeah. You got to give a first impression, which potentially could get you in the door. But yeah, that's all changed, especially when I watched my son go through the process. I felt his pain. I'm like, wow, I'm so glad that I'm not in the job market right now. That would be... I don't know that I could actually...
Knock on wood, I really hope I never have to interview for one again. I've been lucky enough to have my own company doing my own thing now for a decade plus. And if I never had to do another job interview, I'd be just fine.
It's like getting back in the dating world. No, thank you. I'm happily married. I look at the dating world, I said, no, thank you. So you grew up in Charlotte?
Yeah, pretty much. We moved there when I was 5, so that's basically all I remember. Grew up in Charlotte, and then went to UNC Chapel Hill from undergrad, and then clear across the country to San Diego.
Okay.
Yeah.
My son just got so he works for American Airlines.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so he's now stationed. He's a first year,
Okay.
and he just got his, I don't know, commissioning. I don't know what they call it, but he's in Charlotte.
Oh, very nice.
So he's going to be, they're actually looking for a house right now there. So he's
Good
all
deal.
excited about that. And we have a place in Tennessee. So it's going to be nice to be about 3-4 hours away.
Yeah.
So we're excited for that. Plus the free airline tickets on.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. The buddy passes.
No, yeah, trust me, I've already kind
The
of
non-revving thing. Yeah, that used to be a great deal back in the day, right? In the 90s, when planes flew half empty and nobody cared about making money. But now, ever since the modern world, they got those computer algorithms that right 24 hours before the computer looks and says, oh, there's 8 seats available, flash sale. And then, they oversell every single airplane. So now the buddy passes you can't get on anything.
Even for my son, they just went to a little getaway trip.
Yeah.
And of course, they're flying free with American. However, they sat in the airport
yeah.
because he wasn't deadheading or anything.
Yeah.
He's just a passenger.
Yep.
And I think he had to wait for 3 different flights before they finally found a
Been there.
couple seats.
Yeah, I've slept overnight in Baltimore's airport, so that was fun. I do not recommend that.
Yeah, we're learning some of the intricacies of it. So as a kid, your whole family is flying. Aviation, you're eating it, you're drinking it. Did you ever do any flying as a kid? Or?
Yeah, a few times my dad would take me up in Cessnas, and I was in a Skyhawk I think I was like 3 months old when I took my first Skyhawk flight. My mom and dad went to see somebody, and so I don't remember that one, obviously, but yeah. So here and there, I wasn't exposed to general aviation, too much as a kid. That came later. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so when so you started to fly in 2012?
Yeah.
And was that with Plus One or?
No, so I started with my dad. He's a CFI.
He is.
Yeah,
okay.
and so started lessons with him. And it's funny because the first time you get into a Cessna, for those who have never been around general aviation airplanes, they're basically held together with glue and prayer. So you get in this Cessna, and it's creaking and it's cracking, and you hear all these sounds, and you're like, this thing is going to hold together. It doesn't feel anything like
some of them are
a
like
commercial
pretty
airliner.
scary.
So. But yeah, so started flying with him, and then came out here and didn't initially join Plus One. I did some flying with other places, and then after I got certificates, I came over to the club because I realized that it existed. It's really funny because we don't do any kind of broad marketing. We're not broadcasting a message saying, "Hey, come join Plus One." It's really you kind of got to stumble across us to find us.
No, yeah, I did not get any advertising when I joined. I believe I was just looking for someplace with more options.
Yeah.
You learned on a Cessna. I learned on a Piper.
Okay.
For those that don't know, Cessnas are generally high wing trainers. Pipers are low wing trainers. And there's some idiosyncrasies about both when you're learning to fly. But the Cessna is the #1 trainer out there.
Yeah.
And so most clubs have tons of Cessnas.
Yeah, most popular airplane ever built. They built more of those than anything else. The Cessna 172, yeah.
Yeah, so it was always hard for me to find a good Piper. Well, and then the other thing is to find one that I felt safe flying.
For sure.
Plus One actually has some great Pipers out there owned by a gentleman who's also a mechanic, and he takes really good care of them, and I love flying them. But there's this fear amongst the general population that general aviation is just unsafe. It is daredevil. You're going to get killed. What would your opinion be when you hear those types of things? Because you're an instructor, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and
I'm a CFI.
The fear is on the face. They're excited, but there's the fear.
Yep. So what I'll tell you is you're going to get killed. If aviation doesn't get you, right, something's going to get you. Nobody gets out of life alive. Trite little saying there. But my philosophy on it is the ride ends no matter what you do, right? And you can wrap yourself in bubble wrap and sit on a couch and watch Netflix, and then diabetes and cardiovascular disease is going to get you because you never get any exercise, right? So you have to do something with the time that you're given. And I think that flying is, for me anyway, is the pinnacle of freedom. right? You're up in the sky, especially if you're flying aerobatics. You can do whatever you want, whenever you want, right? And you see the whole world laid out in front of you. It's just, it is a kind of freedom that you can't get any other way. GA, general aviation, statistically is about as dangerous as riding a motorcycle. Right. So if you look at the number of deaths per hour of the activity or whatever, general aviation flying is about as dangerous as riding a motorcycle. Right now, riding a motorcycle is not exactly a risk-free activity, and neither is flying. There's always some inherent baseline level of risk in flying, no matter what you do. But you've been on the freeway when you see, this guy on a Ninja come screaming down at 180 miles an hour. He's weaving in and out of cars, right? And you look at him and you go, all right, there's a dead man walking, right? What an idiot. And you can do that with flying, right? You can be that motorcycle guy in flying. You can go out and call your buddy up and say, hey, man, come outside. I'm going to buzz your house. And then you fly over your buddy's house real low at, 180 miles an hour. And sure enough, there's some power lines that you didn't know were there, and you decapitate yourself and wreck the airplane because you did something stupid, right? You were that idiot on the freeway driving the motorcycle at 180 miles an hour. Or you can approach flying, and say, listen, there's some risk here. This is an activity that can kill me, right? And you can remind yourself of that. And you can do your very best to get rid of all the risks that you can possibly get rid of, right? You can be very thorough when you inspect the airplane before you go fly. You can be very careful with the weather conditions you fly in. You can make sure that you follow the rules, right? The rules say you can't fly a certain height above people and property and things, and they're there for a reason. The rules are not, as much as I dislike governments in general, they're not there because some government bureaucrat is like, all right, let's just ruin everybody's fun, right?
Yeah, and aviation, generally speaking, they're pretty well laid out.
Yeah, they're there because people have died,
yes.
right? And so it's a book written in blood. So, somebody dies and then a new rule gets added that says, all right, don't do what killed this guy, right? So you can follow those rules and you can make sure that you don't get tempted into the hot dogging, showing off kind of thing. And if you do that, if you approach aviation with that mentality, right, then it is not a very risky activity, all things said, right? Mm-hmm. Now, there is absolutely the chance that you get unlucky. Right, no matter how good you are, no matter how thorough you are, exactly. But I drove up here today, 30 minutes to get to this studio on the freeway. There is an absolute chance that you get killed in a car wreck. Car driving is very risky, statistically speaking, but we discount that because it's a normal part of our everyday life. Right, we drive everywhere, so we never think about how actually risky driving the car is. For most people, flying in little airplanes is not part of everyday life. Right, it's something new. Mm-hmm. It's something very uncomfortable and unfamiliar. And so now you naturally, the human mind goes, oh, this is risky. I've never done this. I don't know what's going on. This seems dangerous. But the actual dangerous thing, just driving your car, we discount totally because it's just, we're used to it, mm-hmm. right? And that's how I feel about the risk. General aviation is as risky as you want to make it. And you can get rid of almost all of that risk and leave it down to just chance and man, if fate has it out for you one day, then you're
gonna get you one way or another.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm a student of general aviation accidents. Might think of that as macabre, but it's not. Mm-hmm. For me, it's not because I just like to understand.
Yeah.
And so every time, there's a couple really good guys that have some really good podcasts out there. Pilot Debrief is one. Hoover does that. I really like watching him. He's a former military pilot, also, I believe, an airline pilot. But he really does a good job breaking it down. And it's amazing how the majority of these accidents are bad decision making from
absolutely.
the pilot.
Yeah.
When I was learning to fly early on, my instructor said, stop trying to force the plane to fly. It wants to fly.
Yeah.
And these planes, that's what they're designed to do. And you see these people that, poor decision making, right?
Yep.
They fly into storms. A significant amount of these are VFR pilots, the visual flight rule pilots that are flying into IFR conditions, which are instrument flying rules. And they end up in a situation that will overwhelm the plane. These planes are not indestructible.
Yeah.
And it's sad because a lot of times they have innocent passengers with them. They've got their wife or their husband with them. They've got their kids.
Yep.
They're sad stories. And when you see all of the warnings, especially as a pilot, that precede the actual fatality or best case scenario
Yeah.
accident, the writing was on the wall.
Yep. Yeah. The problem is that and every pilot, right, is well aware of sort of, we call that the accident chain, right, the events that link together to lead up to an accident. And when you go through flight training, right, your CFI or somebody tells you, look, here's some examples of guys that made really bad decisions, and here's all the steps along the way where they could have averted that, right? So everybody kind of gets that training, but the thing is, you don't realize exactly how insidious that chain is, right? Because it creeps up on you. It's not obvious in the moment that you're on this accident chain that's going to lead to tragedy, right? I'll give you a really good example. A couple years ago, we have an aerobatic contest. I got to go to an aerobatic contest, right? And my aircraft, most aerobatic aircraft are VFR only aircraft, meaning they don't have the instruments on board to fly in clouds, right? As you know, just for everybody else, to fly in a cloud, you got to have certain instruments on the plane so that you can tell which way your ass is in the cloud, right? Because
Exactly.
you no longer have a visual reference. And to save weight, aerobatic airplanes, they don't put all those systems in there, right? Because you're not going to fly aerobatics in the cloud, so you don't need them.
No point.
Exactly. So I'm trying to get to this aerobatic contest. My friends are already on their way. And we have the marine layer here in San Diego, right? The clouds just roll in off the water, and it's only maybe 500,000 feet thick, but these clouds just whoosh, roll in all the way to the mountains, intersect the mountain range out east of San Diego. And so I'm flying around underneath this marine layer, and I'm looking for a way to get through the clouds, right? It's been kind of broken all morning. There's been holes here and there. And so I'm flying around trying to get a hole so I can get out of the marine layer and go on my way over to where the aerobatic contest is. And there's no holes. And I am flying out east, coming up on the mountains, and you look, right? You're underneath a cloud layer, and you look and you go, okay, well, there's where the clouds hit the mountains. I can clearly see 3 miles away over there, the clouds are intersecting the mountains, so I won't fly over there, right? I don't want to be the dumbass that flies into the mountain in the cloud. We call that CFIT, controlled flight into terrain, right? So you think, all right, well, I just won't go over there. And that's sort of where, experience is a great teacher, because if you haven't been in this situation, you don't realize that it's not 3 miles away. It is not 3 miles away. As you're flying around, the mist and the visibility, right, are dropping. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, I look down out the side of my open cockpit here, and I look down, and the ground is going away, right? The clouds, I am starting to be in the clouds. Even though I can clearly see a line where the clouds hit the mountains over here, that's not where the clouds are. I'm already in the mist and the vapor and all this stuff, and the visibility is disappearing. The ground is going away. And that's how it happens, right? That event right there. You grow by leaps and bounds because you go, this is way different than I thought it was. It's not a clear, I'm in the clear, and there's the edge of the cloud. Now I'm in the cloud. It creeps up on you, and it is insidious the way it does. And that was a close call for me. I turned around, got out of there, went back and landed, and I waited, for better weather to get to the contest. But yeah, that kind of close call. There's people that survive it, and then there's people that don't. And
yeah, and it happens a lot in general aviation where humility is just not there.
Yeah,
and almost an arrogance that they are the exception. They can get, and the other thing with flying is you're moving so fast.
Yeah,
and things happen really, really quick.
Yeah.
When I first started flying, I bought a 1979, or it was a 1980 Piper Dakota, the 235.
Yeah.
They called it the 236. It was 235 horsepower plane, fun plane.
Yeah.
We had a place up in the mountains. So I said, well, when I would fly a standard Piper 180, you got to watch out for your density. My goodness, my mind just went blank.
Density, altitude.
Density. Yeah. Thank you. Your density, altitude. You're either flying in real early, and it would get hot up there.
Yeah.
So I got this plane, and I was flying my practice wife at the time, and my son, who was just a couple of years old, and I was tired.
Yeah.
We flew up to Northern Cal, then coming back, I said, let's stay a night over in Big Bear. And I'm coming in over the mountains, and it's an interesting, when you're coming in from the east side heading towards the lake, not over the lake. The trees are pretty up there. So I would do a slip to land. I'd come in high and I would slip it down. And it was a comfortable way to go. And I'm coming in, and as I'm slipping, I go ahead and flare out, and I get a downdraft really bad. And
Yeah.
my stall alarms just open. I just started falling towards the runway. My left wing lost lift. And, I probably was 100 feet above the runway, but if it could have been 1 inch, scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
The training kicked in where I was, a full throttle, nose kind of down, try to get some air across it. And we got out of there, and I just flew back to San Diego.
Yeah.
And that was my one near miss.
Yeah.
But it put the fear of God in me, man.
Yep.
And I was lax. See, I knew to watch out for situations like that, come in a little hot, do a little, whatever I would do to try to mitigate those types of landings up there. But I was tired.
Yeah.
And it was, I've done this a bunch of times.
Yeah. Yeah. That's sort of the trajectory of every pilot, right? Because when you're starting out, when you're brand new, you're afraid. You are scared of the airplane. You're scared of the conditions. Everything is new. And so you are very alert, right? You are on your game. You are very conservative, right? You look at the winds, you look at the weather, you do all this stuff because you're new to the environment. And then you get a little experience under your belt. You get a few hundred hours. And then you become the most dangerous a pilot ever is. Because now you've lost that newness, right? Now it's familiar, right? Yeah, I've checked the weather. I've done this. The winds, I'm sure it's fine. So you start to get complacent. And then something happens. Every pilot has that moment where they have that come to Jesus moment, just fear of God gets put into you by something. You go, and then you grow by leaps and bounds. And now you've kind of crossed what a danger zone in building time, right? Where you're on the other side of it and you realize I did get complacent. I relaxed. I was off my game.
And how quickly it happens.
And then now you're a much safer pilot, but there's this zone in the middle where you really think you know your shit and you haven't been tested. And until you're tested and you get that I could have died today moment, you're not really as competent and safe a pilot as you think you are.
When I was training, I'm kind of a perfectionist. I try to dig as deep as I can into whatever I'm learning. I need to know it all. I'll go beyond what they asked me to learn.
Sure.
And I was really being hard on myself one time when I was getting my private pilot's license. I was having a terrible time trying to figure out how to land.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult task. And after the flight, the debrief, he could tell that I just was pissed. Not pissed, but he could see that I was not happy with my training flight. And I said, it just frustrates me because, I'm making so many mistakes. Mm-hmm. And he said something wise to me. He said, Ryan, I want you to make those mistakes when I'm in the right seat,
Yep.
when I'm there with you. He says, my biggest fear are those students who hardly make any mistakes.
Yes, that is so accurate. Yeah. When I sign somebody off for a tailwheel, endorsement or check somebody out in a plane, I would love to see them botch something and recover without me getting involved. If they grease everything and everything's perfect, then I don't have a reason that I can't check them out in the plane, right? I can't be like, well, you were too good. I don't trust you, but.
And what are they going to do when you're not there, right,
Yeah.
Brian? And that was his point. He
Yeah,
said,
you always
I want
got to
you
wonder, how are they going to handle when the mistakes happen, when something doesn't go right? If you don't see them recover, then you leave and you're very nervous, right? Because when you sign them off, your ass is on the line. You vouched for this person. You've said, yeah, I checked them out. They're good to go. It makes me nervous when somebody is too good.
Yeah, that really hit home with me. And my whole attitude changed after that. And I was young and, making mistakes back then, I believe, was failure. As now I'm older, failure is actually a function of success, right?
Yeah.
You've got to make those mistakes in order to get good at what you're doing. So it was very wise for him to say that, and it was done in about a sentence. And I went back with a new attitude on it.
Yeah.
Now, back in the day, I was paying in 2021, I was paying for a 152 Cessna, I think was $45 an hour wet.
Wow.
Maybe.
Yeah.
No, it was probably 60, but it was around $50 to $60 an hour wet. A 172 was $85 wet. Now, wet means it comes with fuel, so you're paying for the time in the plane. Now,
it's insane.
It's gone. What does a Cessna trainer cost these days?
Plus One is actually one of the cheapest places that you can fly a 172. We have 172s for in the 130s an hour, right? So if you go anywhere else in the country and you look, it's 180, 190, 200 wet, and plus one for some reason. Maybe it's because we have so many of them, so there's some competition between owners to keep their rates down. But yeah, you can find 172s here for 130, and then the majority of them are somewhere in the 140s now. To fly at wet rates, which is not cheap. It adds up because you're paying for the instructor as well. You got to pay
correct.
the CFI, so it's that adds another $80 to $100 an hour. So it's not a cheap hobby. If you're looking to save money, don't get into aviation. Yeah.
When you're looking to fly, so those people that are listening to this, that it's been on their mind, and hey, this is something I've always wanted to do. What would your advice be when they're looking, number one, what type of plane to train on? Number two, what should they look for in their instructor? And let me preface that with a lot of instructors are just trying to get time so they can get to the airlines.
Yep.
What are some good questions they can ask their instructor to know that they're getting a quality teacher, somebody who is invested in their best interests?
Yeah, I think it's fair to ask a potential CFI, hey, are you going to be around for the next year, right? Most people do their licenses, their initial private pilot training in about 6 months. If you fly a few times a week, you can knock it out pretty quick. If you fly more, obviously you can do it faster. People have done it in 6 weeks. The minimum number of hours is 40 with some sprinkling in there of different, subsets of kind of flights you got to do. But you can get it done pretty quickly. So I think it's fair to ask the CFI, hey, are you about to bail for the airlines or can I count on you being here for the next year? And then I would ask them about their record, which is also fair game. Say, hey, how many pilots have you trained? When's the last time you sent somebody for a check ride, right? How many people have passed on their first attempt when they go for their check ride, right? And if you're working with a CFI who has like a 50% pass rate, maybe there's something to be said for that CFI. Maybe I would get a second opinion or talk to another CFI. That's all fair. I would ask them about, you will either mesh with a CFI or you won't, right? And that comes down to what your kind of personality is, how you learn, right? Some people learn visually, some people learn through lectures, right? Being told, some people learn by reading it, really well and studying, and hands-on learners. So your learning style has to match with the CFI's kind of teaching style and personality, right? If you are a dynamic personality and your CFI is kind of a bookish, buckled down old school guy, you might not mesh very well, right? And that's going to slow down your progress. So I would look very hard, especially at, do you like this person? You're going to be investing a lot of time and money with them. You're going to be sitting, literally touching shoulders with them for, the next 6 months. So do you like them? And I would use that as a criterion. And I would...
And don't be afraid to interview 2 or 3.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's a very important relationship, life and death. If they don't teach it correctly.
Remember that you are the customer, right? You're paying thousands and thousands of dollars to this person. It's a big investment. So you would be crazy to just take the first one that comes available, without trying a couple out and talking to them and get a feel for them. Get a feel for how much time they're willing to invest. Are their answers nice? Can they answer your questions well? Do they seem like they're just trying to get you off the phone because they don't want to be tied up? Are they busy? Do they have time for you in their schedule, right? Some CFIs have so many students that it's difficult to book them. You want to make sure that if you're learning to fly, you can make consistent progress. You really should be flying 2 to 3 times a week. If you fly once a week, you're just, it's like piano lessons as a kid. If you practice once a week
for 30 minutes,
before your lesson, you're going to suck in the lesson, right? And it's the same with flying.
And it costs you a lot more money.
It does. Yeah, it stretches everything out.
Currency is critical in anything, really, but in flying, life and death, you have to be current. You have to have your skills. It isn't like riding a bike.
Yeah. There's also, I would add, there's kind of a spectrum of CFIs, right? There's the brand new guys who just got their CFIs. And what you need to know is you can get a CFI with about 250 hours of flight time. And you are not, I don't care how good you are, if you're Bob Hoover reborn, you're just not a all-around competent pilot at 250 hours yet, right? You don't have that experience. You haven't had those close calls we talked about, that have kind of set you on the other side of that canyon of death, right? Where people are risky. And so you can find CFIs that are brand new, that are good instructors, right? And that are not just doing it to put in the time and get to the airlines. So I don't want to denigrate all of them, but I would be careful, to ask, are you brand new to this? And if so, be a little more thorough in asking them some questions and whether or not you want to work with them. And then you have your really old, crusty CFIs, right, on the other end that have been teaching for 40 years. And there's a funny thing in medical doctors, right? They looked at what are the outcomes for surgeons. And they looked at by surgeons' experience, right? And they said, actually, it's not the old guys that have been doing it for so long that are your safest bet. These guys don't have the best outcomes. And it's not the brand new surgeons right out of med school that are your best bet, right? Because they don't have the experience yet. The old surgeons, the reason they're not as great is they are kind of set in their ways and they're not up to date on the very latest in all of the technical advancements in surgery. And the new guys just don't have a lot of experience yet. So your best bet, if you want to survive a surgery, have no complications, and come out of there, at 100%, your best bet is to find somebody who's been doing it for a few years, who's kind of young, but still is just on the other side of that canyon, right, that we talked about. That group of surgeons has the best outcome because they're still up to date on all the new stuff, right? They're willing to learn and adapt. They're not set in their ways like the old crusty guys. I've been doing this 40 years. How dare you tell me how to cut somebody open?
3,000 hours.
Yeah. And then, they're not brand new out of med school where they don't have the experience yet to handle it. That is your best outcome. And I would say that's kind of the sweet spot for CFIs too, right?
In your humble opinion, because this isn't written down anywhere, what kind of an hour range should you look for in a CFI?
Oh,
Or would you not put it on hours?
I wouldn't put it on hours. I would ask,
Sure.
how much experience they have instructing, how many students have they instructed, right? I think that's more important than the hours. If you're a CFI's first student, that's not to say you shouldn't work with that CFI. I would just ask them. I would then go a little more in depth and, all right, well, tell me, what the plan is. What syllabus are we going to use, right? How are we going to get this done? What DPE, designated pilot examiner, am I going to go for my check ride with? CFIs who have been doing this a while will have relationships with DPEs, right? They will have ones that they like. They will have ones where they have the horror stories, right? And they say, no, absolutely not. You're not doing a check ride with John. Zero chance. Nobody likes John, right? And that kind of inside baseball knowledge is valuable.
Right.
And
I think having an organized syllabus, one of the things that kind of shocked me, because after I got my VFR, I started training, and I'm currently training for my IFR.
Yeah.
I talked to 2 different CFIs, had no syllabus.
Yeah.
Just kind of
disorganized,
winging it. No pun intended. Actually, I guess that was a pun, but not organized.
Yeah.
And I didn't. That set wrong with me because I want to be able to see what the course of action looks like. So number one, I can get ahead of it. I can know what I need to learn. It also tells me the CFI has a game plan and a goal set out. So that's something I look for is how organized, is there a syllabus, is there a training plan for whatever certificate I'm trying to get to.
The last thing you want to do, right, is get to the check ride, which is absolutely syllabus driven, right? The check ride is, the DPE pulls out a list. There's a book, right, called the Airman Certification Standards, and it's basically just a giant outline of stuff you got to do. Right. And the DPE does, all right, let's do this. Check. Let's do this. Check. And the last thing you want is to have worked with a CFI that didn't really have a game plan and was just kind of doing his thing, and then get on the check ride and the DPE goes, all right, let's do a steep turn. And you're like, what is a steep turn? Right. Because you didn't have a CFI who used a syllabus. That would be a bad day. So don't do that.
I agree. And I did not. So when I got mine, I think what is 40 hours is the minimum.
Yeah.
What's the average do you see students
more
taking?
than that. Yeah, nobody does it in the minimums, right? Especially nowadays, everything is more complex. Airspace is more complex. Aircraft are more complex, right? We've got GPS and advanced systems, G1000 glass panels. So you can't really be effective in 40 hours anymore. So I would say the average is probably closer to 60. Most people do about 60. And then if you're flying less, if you're only flying once a week, you can get up to 100 hours. You can really get up there and burn some money doing it. But 60 is a good, round number.
I think it took me just shy. I think it was 58 hours, something like that, 60 hours.
Yep.
And that was back in the old knob turning days. Yep. There was no glass in any of the trainers that I was using, glass cockpits. One of the things that is a big challenge in flying is understanding how to properly operate the avionics.
Oh, yeah.
And these systems, although are very effective and provide a lot more safety, they can be actually detrimental if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that's a big new learning curve, especially for new pilots. And the technology is changing rapidly.
Yeah. Yeah. They ought to get Apple to do the panels in airplanes, right? Because sometimes the UI is just, it sucks.
Well,
It's so hard to use.
Foreflight figured it out with their
That's true. Yeah.
I love their. It's one of the things that has come up. I don't know how long they've been around, but it's a wonderful tool. It's a great flight planning tool, but they call it the electronic flight bag now.
Yeah. Yep.
And you're able to put on your iPad, some really good backup stuff, flight planning and things like that. I don't know. I think the FAA has allowed them to do even more with it. I'm not up to any of that, but
I like using it. I fly with ForeFlight. I mean, I don't know anybody that doesn't fly with ForeFlight at this point.
even airline pilots will have that as a backup, even though, it's just a reference tool in most cases. But it also can, in an emergency situation, it's a backup.
Yeah, my thoughts on it are, there's a school of people that think that flying has gone too technical, right? That we've gone, into this, now everything's an iPad app and we follow magenta lines through the sky and stuff. And there is an argument to be made for that. I think that you should train without that stuff, right? Or at least practice without it so that someday when your iPad fails, if you leave it in the sun, right, it'll overheat and shut down.
That's a big problem.
If you are only capable of flying an airplane when you have your iPad right there and your moving map and your GPS, little airplane showing you where you are, the day it shuts down or crashes, that's going to be a bad day for you. So I would practice without the stuff. But there is absolutely no question that it has made aviation safer, right? If you look at the accident rate, if you look at the fatal rate of accidents, the technological advancements in aviation have made the industry safer. And at the end of the day, you just cannot argue with that. You can wax nostalgic about, back in my day, men were men and they flew airplanes in the without all this crap.
They had calluses on their hands when they were done.
And I am open to that argument because I fly a fabric airplane that was designed in the 1930s, right? And, I think stick and rudder flying is important, but it is just not possible to argue with the outcome of the advances in technology, right? It has made the airlines safer. It has made GA safer. And I think that getting home to your family at the end of the day is more important than saying, I flew like a man today.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's wonderful the technology that's out there. It's a huge learning curve.
Yeah.
My favorite plane that I absolutely love, and if I ever could afford one, I'd buy is the Cirrus, the SR-22. Yep. So I got the transition training, and I flew. They actually had a little SR-20 out at Plus One for a while.
Yeah, Frank's airplane.
Well,
right?
This was a different plane. It's not Frank's, but it was a different plane. And the guy had this great deal where if you prepaid, you were getting it for like the price of a Piper.
Oh, that's nice.
But you're prepaying for 50 hours or something like that. And I flew all over in that plane. What a wonderful plane! And for those that don't know, that plane has a parachute on it that actually takes the whole plane down. Now, there's arguments that go both ways with that. Some people will, we won't go into the arguments on it because there have been accidents and fatalities in those planes. But those that have deployed it has saved lives.
Yep.
More importantly, though, the wife likes it.
Yeah.
I get her to fly. She won't fly in a standard Piper. She just won't do it. Just have a parachute? No. Okay, well, I'll see. I'll drive or I'll take a commercial flight. So that parachute does add some sense of security to some passengers.
A little bit expensive though, because every 10 years I think it is, you got to get it repacked. And it's
very expensive plane to maintain.
$17,000 to get the parachute repacked.
Yeah, we can go into ownership because I did own a plane, a relatively quote unquote inexpensive plane to own, a Piper. Like Cessna, one of the most common airplanes out there. Parts are readily available.
Yep.
The ADs are relatively small. Those are where the FAA says something has to be corrected on that plane, usually because of an accident or something.
Yeah.
But there's hidden costs. People that
they're all over.
They don't realize. You said, I could buy this plane. I mean, I think I bought that plane for $120,000 back in the day.
Yeah.
And you're looking, oh man, I'm only paying X amount a month in my payment, and Mr. Finance over here. And if you straight line it like that, you're screwed.
Yeah.
because there's so many costs per hour that are on the horizon. You got to rebuild these engines. The recommendation on that particular engine was every 2,000 hours.
Yep.
There's annual maintenance,
The inspections
that you have to do, and I think on average my inspection was 3,000. And this is a very basic airplane, and this was 25 years ago.
Yep.
I can't imagine what it would be today. And all sorts of fuel costs and the fixed costs. They call it the fixed costs, and they call it there's another cost they call
variable.
the variable cost. That's correct.
Yeah.
I should ask you.
Finance
You're
MBA.
the finance MBA.
Got to use it for something. I paid for it.
Why am I talking about this? I should ask you. What are the costs? What are the costs involved in owning an airplane? Because you actually own one outright. You own a plane, and then you're a partner in another.
Yeah. Yep. So I'm partners in the one that we have in Plus One. Great Lakes. Biplane, open cockpit biplane, aerobatic biplane.
I'm going to go ahead and put a picture on for everyone who's watching this on YouTube. We're gonna post a picture of this plane. It's absolutely gorgeous.
So, the biggest thing with owning an airplane is the surprise costs that come up, right? Because you can budget for, all right, I got to get it inspected every year, and that's going to run me this, and I got to do oil changes, and that's about this. It's when you go for the inspection and your mechanic comes back to you and he says, well, Ryan, we found this list of 17 discrepancies, and the total to repair them is $27,000, 686, whatever. And that is really, a great example. My airplane,
and that puts your airworthiness certificate at risk.
Sometimes the discrepancies, some of them are little things, like, there's a cracked panel in the back, a little plastic, sidewall panel. That doesn't make the airplane unairworthy, right? You can fly with a little cracked panel. But those things are usually thousands of dollars to replace because you got to order it from Cessna. They got you by the balls, right? They're going to charge you $1,700.
And get it.
Exactly. So there's discrepancies you can defer. We call it deferring. Or, there's ones that the mechanic says, I can't sign off your aircraft as airworthy until this is repaired, right? And one of them, for me, was an engine mount. So the thing that holds the engine to the airplane
might be important.
Yeah, a little tiny part. And mine had from all the aerobatics, it had started. It wasn't cracking yet, but you could see that it was flexing a little bit. And so I sent some photos into the manufacturer, and they said, "Yeah, this is no good. We got to replace it. $7,000." Oh. $7,000 for some welded,
not in the budget.
Yeah, welded tube steel, right? To replace that engine mount. That is a surprise cost. So those things can get you. Tom Reed, who is a director at Plus One, has a great saying. He says he sort of advises new owners coming into the club that want to buy an airplane and put it in the club. And he says, listen, if you can't write a check with 4 zeros at the end without a big argument with your wife, don't buy an airplane. That's his advice, right? Because you will at some point have a surprise cost come up. And you got to cover it to keep the plane flying. And the problem is then you're really hamstrung because even if you're like, I can't do that, I got to sell. Well, now the value of the plane is much less, right? Because it's got this thing hanging over its head where, the buyer has to fix it before they can fly it, and you can't really sell somebody an unairworthy airplane because then they go and they have an accident in it. Their lawyers come to you and you say, hey, why'd you sell this guy an unworthy airplane? We're going to take your house. So you can't really escape the surprises once they come up. So you got to be prepared to deal with them.
So from a finance perspective, do majority of these owners that put their planes in these clubs, whether it's Plus One or another, is it to mitigate cost, or is there actually a way to make it a good investment?
So most owners in the club will break even if they're lucky. Right, so they'll basically fly for free. Their flying is covered when they fly their own airplane because they're making just enough money to keep the thing at zero cost. Right, it pays for its maintenance and the hangar costs or whatever your costs are on the thing. It is possible to make money in aviation. If you want to make $1 million in aviation, start with $8 million. And you will make $1 million in aviation. The way you can actually make money is by putting an airplane in the club that is a training airplane, like a 172, right? Those will actually turn a profit because they fly so much. They're in such high demand that the hours are high enough that you can squeak by and make a profit. Now, the question is, Could you make more with your money if you go do literally anything else? Like just put it in the stock market, buy real estate, buy like a mini storage facility, right? Open a McDonald's franchise. If you want to make money, if you want to be a wise investor, there are other ways to make your money work harder for you.
So you got to love aviation and want to mitigate some of the costs.
You gotta want to be in the environment, right?
Yeah, and that's what I've heard. And from personal experience, the unrealized costs. Okay, time to sell the airplane.
Yep. It adds up.
You know what's interesting that I've noticed is the price of airplanes, specific ones, have gone up. They're appreciating, unlike most things with motors that go the opposite direction. For instance, the 1970, actually it was a 79 Piper Dakota, I paid $120. You can't find one in good condition 25 years later for under, $180 to $250. And $180 is cheap.
Yeah.
$250 is standard.
So
good airplane.
Nerdy finance hat again. It's tough to compare over 20 years, right? Because you're comparing nominal dollars instead of real inflation adjusted dollars, right? So $120,000 back in 2000 might be around 180 to 200 today, right? So the actual amount of purchasing power that the airplane cost you is about the same over time. The thing that is helpful for GA airplanes is all the depreciation has pretty much gone out of them, right? Because they're all, at this point, the 172 fleet, the 172Ns and things are all 50 years old. So they've depreciated all they're going to depreciate, right? And you can now buy them without taking that massive depreciation hit. If you go buy a brand new 172 from Cessna, they still make them, with all the fancy avionics. Now they got glass cockpits and all this stuff. You'll spend $800,000 to get that airplane, right? Versus the $200,000 it'll cost you to get a pretty nice 172N, which is a 50-year-old, produced in the 70s, basically. And the advantage there is when you buy the old one, you've already gotten rid of all the depreciation. So you can count on it kind of staying around what you paid for it, really. Ups and downs with, if you buy it with a brand new engine and then you wear the engine out and you go to sell it, it'll go for less, right? Because the engine's worn out.
You can always tell.
Yeah.
When you're looking at the prices.
Yep. But the nice thing is the depreciation hit is kind of gone versus buying a new one. You buy a brand new $800,000 Cessna today, you're going to take the depreciation hit, and then in 10 years it'll be worth half of that, right? Because now it's a used aircraft. Same with cars, right? Yeah.
So you decided, hey, I'm a finance guy. I'm a pretty smart guy. I got my MBA. I'm going to go ahead
let's
and
not jump to conclusions. I do own an airplane. I'm not sure smart is the right word.
I'm going to go ahead and buy a state-of-the-art, brand new, off the factory floor with all the current aviation. So you bought a 1976 Great Lakes.
I did, yeah.
Again, I'll pop that picture up. But, if you picture, the Red Baron type A plane, I'm not sure it's the same type of plane, but, that was a Sopwith. No, was that a Sopwith Camel?
That was the Tri-Wing. The
Snoopy flew the Sopwith Camel, according to his little house.
Apparently, the Sopwith Camel was one of the hardest airplanes to land.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't even know what it looks like.
Old. It looks old. Yeah.
Well, your plane looks old.
Hey,
it's a beautiful plane.
It's just slightly older than me. It's middle-aged.
There you
go.
But this plane, let me look. I took some notes here. They started this. The first production of this plane was in 1929.
Yeah.
1929, and it went on to produce quite a few planes back in the day. And then in 2011, the company Waco began new production of this plane, a touring model and a sports model, an acrobatic model. Which one? Now, yours is a 1976.
Yeah.
Do you do, now I know you do aerobatics. Is that an aerobatic plane?
It is, yeah, fully aerobatic. It has inverted fuel and oil system, so it'll stay running upside down. Trust me, I've tested it.
But it's open cockpit.
It is.
So three-point harness?
7-point.
7?
Yeah, we don't joke around, man. That thing is you are really strapped down to the airplane. I'll give you a fun story. I tell this to everybody who comes and flies aerobatics for me. There is how tight your harness is, and there is how tight you think your harness is. And I'm going to show you the difference the first time I roll us inverted, because there is nothing more uncomfortable than rolling inverted in an open cockpit and falling about 2 to 3 inches out of your seat, just because you didn't have your harness as tight as you thought it was. It's a wild world for sure.
So I fly straight and level. I fly when there's 7 days of clear weather and I'm only going 45 minutes away.
Yeah.
It's recreation for me.
Yeah.
I don't do. There's no reason for me to fly. So when I do it, it's got to be. I have very high personal standards, so I have a checklist. Okay, is this good? Is this good? Blah 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 blah, and. I don't fly upside down. I love watching air shows. What's it like? Where did you go in your mind that, hey, I'm a good pilot. I learned the straight and level. I got my instrument. You're an instrument rated pilot?
Oh yeah.
You've gone the whole route. No, I think I'm going to take it and start getting a toy in the sky.
Yeah, so it happened for me. I got my tailwheel endorsement, right? I learned to fly tailwheel, and then I had done multi-engine. I had just finished up my multi-engine, and then tackled tailwheel and was having fun doing all that. And I decided, hey, I've never done spins, so spins are not required anymore to get a spin. For those of you who don't know about flying, is you make the airplane stop flying, stall, and then it spirals towards the ground in what we call auto rotation, right? Which sounds much more intimidating than it actually is once you do a few of them. But I had never done any. And they used to be required to be a pilot long ago, before 1940 something. And the FAA took them out of the requirements because more people were dying getting the training than were being saved by knowing how to recover from a spin, right? So the FAA looked at this and said, this is stupid. We're killing students and instructors. Let's take it out. But I had gone all the way through, these advanced ratings here, and I had never done a spin. So I decided I got to fix this. I got to at least have recovered from a spin, right? So that if I do it someday inadvertently, I will have, been exposed to it. So I went and I did some spin training. And during that flight, we also did a loop. And a ballistic roll. And the first time that I saw the world upside down from the top of this loop, I was hooked. I was like, oh, this is a whole different. This is flying, right? And I never looked back. Yeah, I just got hooked on aerobatics and just ran with that for the past 8-9 years.
Oh
yeah.
wow! So those of you watching this, you don't just do that in a regular general aviation aircraft. Okay,
that is true.
These planes have very specific load calcs on their wings and all sorts of things. You hear about this, a general aviation regular plane flying into a storm, it gets torn apart because the load on the wings or the body, it overwhelms the plane. What separates or what defines an aerobatic plane versus your standard general aviation where you're not doing loops?
So there's a few things, right? Aerobatic airplanes are going to be built to handle the loads that you impose on them during aerobatics, right? So if you go out in a Piper and you just at cruise airspeed yank the stick back as hard as you possibly can, you're going to impose a ton of G forces on the wing, right? All the bolts that hold the wing together, all the ribs and the spars, the structure of the airplane is going to have to absorb those Gs. And for non-aerobatic aircraft, there's a limit there, right? They say, hey, listen, don't pull more than 3.4 Gs, otherwise you might rip the airplane apart. Right. And aerobatic airplanes are overbuilt, right? Everything is overbuilt to handle more Gs. So you can go out and you can pull, 5, 6, 10 Gs in an extra without breaking anything.
In a small aerobatic, you can pull 10 Gs?
Yeah, the extra, the extra 300 and 330 SC, when you're flying them alone, right? So you're loaded lightly.
Right.
They're rated for positive, negative 10G. And then there's aircraft that go above that. There's aircraft that are rated for positive, negative 13. I forget what the MX is, but it might be 13 or 14G. And at that point, right, you are the limiting factor. You will break before the airplane.
Do you
breaks.
wear some sort of special gear to handle that kind of?
No G suits. No, we don't have.
So G suits like a
Yeah, basically for fighters, it hooks up to the airplane and uses compressed air to inflate a bag around your calves to squeeze blood out of your legs so you don't black out, right, when you pull high G maneuvers. But our aircraft don't have any of those systems. So what we do is G strain, right? So you tense up your calves, you tense up your quads and your abs, right? And you buckle down like this while you're pulling real hard through the air. And what that does is kind of collapse all of your blood vessels so that blood doesn't flow away from your head. But I have blacked myself out a couple times.
Oh, no.
Not lost consciousness, but what happens to you is the first thing you get is tunnel vision. So your vision narrows down. This all goes black and you get kind of like a dot right ahead that you can see. And that's your first indication that you need to relax the G's, right? As soon as you relax the G's, it comes right back because your blood, comes back to your brain and you get your vision back. If you keep pulling, you will gray out, where basically everything goes gray. You no longer see anything. And then if you keep pulling, you'll black out, where your vision dies and you can't see anything. And then if you keep pulling, you'll hit what we call G-lock, G-L-O-C, G, loss of consciousness, which is now there's no blood in your brain, so you've gone unconscious, right? And then things kind of take their natural course. You relax because your brain can no longer pull anymore. And, within a few seconds, you wake up and your plane is barreling at the ground at VNE, velocity never exceed. And, you're like, oh, shit. And now you got to get out of this. But the idea is don't let it get to that point, right? Recognize when you need to relax the G and get ahead of it.
And that comes with the training.
Exactly.
I would imagine a big part of the training.
Yep.
Because that force is happening to you a lot during aerobatics.
Yeah. It's also, believe it or not, you get used to it to a certain extent, right? So if I haven't done aerobatics for a long time, like maybe over the winter, and I hop in my airplane and I go out and I, push negative G's, I will be much more prone to blacking out or redding out. Redding out is when you push negative and the blood rushes to your head and now you just see red. I will be much more prone to have that happen than if I've been flying aerobatics regularly, kind of, every few days, and my body is just kind of used to the G's.
Is there a fitness regimen that you can do?
Being fit definitely helps. Yeah. Cardiovascular fitness, weightlifting, all of it really, really helps, right? But that's true of anything in life. You're just better at it if you're healthy. Yeah.
And you're lighter.
True. Yeah. Which makes a difference in my airplane.
Yeah. So I'm going to put also a picture of the other aerobatic plane. That's a
Panzel S330.
Panzel S330.
That's owned by a friend of mine. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a very common plane you see in aerobatics.
So the Panzel isn't. It looks like an extra, which is a very common plane. The Panzel, there are only 9 of those flying in the world.
9.
Yeah. There used to be 13, but a few of them have crashed. So there's 9 left flying in the world.
Is it a kit plane?
No, it is an experimental home-built plane. It's built by a guy named Greg Panzel up in Michigan. And that's how it got its name, the Panzel. It's based on an older design called a Staudacher. And the Staudacher was built with a lot of wood and heavy materials. Greg bought the plans, the rights to the Staudacher, and then said, all right, well, what if we just got rid of all this heavy wood and used carbon fiber instead? So he took hundreds of pounds off the airplane, gave it a souped-up, overcompressed racing engine and the same wing airfoil, and renamed it the Panzel S330 under a new type certificate. And it is a small nuclear bomb strapped to a wing. That's the best way to describe it.
What's the speed of this thing?
So its red line is, I believe, it's been a while since I looked at it, but I believe it was like 250 miles an hour. And it is absolutely rated to pull a ton of G. The wing spar, the spar is the main beam of the wing, if you will. This thing runs from wingtip to wingtip, and it is one giant piece of spruce. Just a giant, 6x6, just all the way through this thing. And it is massively strong. They actually tested it, and they put the wing in a test rig, right? And what they do is they strap this thing down, and then they add some straps to the wingtip, and they just try to pull the thing apart, right? They try to bend the wing to see where it's going to break. And they got it all the way to 20 G, and then it broke the test stand. That's how strong this wing is. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that gives you some comfort when you're pulling some of these 10 Gs.
For sure. Yep.
Wow. So if a pilot like myself says, hey, this sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
I would like to try some of this aerobatic. Yep. Is there, here in San Diego, does Plus One offer that training?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a small fleet of aerobatic CFIs, myself included among them. And if you call us up and say, hey, I want to fly loops and rolls, we will absolutely fly loops and rolls with you. Believe it or not, you're going to find this hard to believe. You could be checked out to solo in aerobatics, assuming you can already fly tailwheel, right? If we got to teach a tailwheel, then that's another thing because you got to land a tailwheel airplane, so that's a little more time. But if you've already got the tailwheel knocked out and you just want to add aerobatics, you can be flying aerobatics solo with about 4 to 5 flight lessons.
Really?
Yep.
That's surprising.
It is very easy to pick up. Right? If I took you out
in
today,
the correct airplane,
yeah,
perhaps.
in the correct airplane. But if I took you out today, you could fly a loop within 10 minutes. I would coach you. I would demo one. I would talk you through it.
All right, the podcast's over, guys. We're going to be heading out to the airport, and I'll get back to you with some video.
Yeah, it is very easy to pick up. It is very difficult to master. Right? Because the way we teach aerobatics is to competition standards. The IAC, International Aerobatic Club, is the governing body of aerobatics in the United States. And the way we teach it is to competition standards, which means everything has to fly and be scored by a judge sitting on the ground looking at you as a perfect 10. It works like gymnastics at the Olympics, right? So you see these gymnasts do like 7 flips and then 6 back rolls, and you watch them on TV and like your vertebrae are just crunching up, just sitting on the couch watching this person do all this stuff. They nail a landing, and then you look at the judges, and the judges are like 7.2, 8.1. You're like, what in the world? That was,
what did
insane.
they do wrong?
Yeah. Aerobatics is very similar, right? It's gymnastics at thousands of feet in the sky. There's judges on the ground that watch you. So if your loop is supposed to be a perfect circle, you get points off if it's not a perfect circle. If it looks like a cursive L in the sky or an egg lying on its side, right? If you're supposed to be flying a perfectly vertical line up and you're 5 degrees off, that's a point off. Every variation is a point deduction. There's a whole laundry list of rules for how you score these figures, but we train people to fly perfect figures, not the kind of weekend warrior aerobatics. Anybody can go out in their RV and yank the stick back and fly a loop in the sky that looks like crap to the ground. But if you train to those standards, you don't really have a grasp on aerobatics, and you don't really understand energy management and the state of the aircraft and staying safe. That will eventually come back to bite you, because aerobatics, no matter how good you are, at some point the airplane is going to do something that you didn't expect or you didn't intend for it to do. And what saves you is your experience and comfort recovering from those situations, right? You go, yep, that didn't work out. Let me get out of this. And if you're not used to that, you can put in the wrong inputs or do the wrong thing, and then things get very dangerous very quickly.
Flying at these unusual attitudes and these speeds, decision making is fast forwarded.
Yes. Yeah, there's a window where you got to do the right thing. And if you miss that window, now the airplane is above VNE, it's 70 degrees nose down, it's inverted, right? And you're coming up on the ground, and the time to make the decision to get out and do the right thing has already passed. And now, you can rip the airplane apart by over G'ing it. G is a function of speed. The faster you go, the more G you're going to pull. So if you're going way too fast and you apply the G load, you can break the airplane, right? You can knock yourself unconscious. There's plenty of ways to kill yourself doing aerobatics. Yeah. But it's just like we started at. If you approach it from the right attitude and you're methodical about it and you're careful, right? And you ask and you get instruction, you don't just go out and wing it. You can mitigate those risks to a large extent. And then aerobatics, just like general aviation flying itself, is as risky as you want to make it. If you want to go out and be the air show pilot and fly 100 feet above the ground doing loops and rolls, well, that's fine, but you're probably going to be a corpse sooner. If you are up high, you're well away from the ground, right? You've got proper instruction. You've practiced getting out of these sticky situations where the airplane, does the wrong thing. Then, you have much less risk. You're doing it smartly.
Altitude's a pilot's. All right, we're back. So you were talking about, and actually it was surprising to me that like 4 or 5 lessons and you can become an aerobatic. Let's say you do that, and you get this. Is there planes to rent? Or?
Absolutely. Yeah. Plus One has 2 Great Lakes, a super decathlon, another decathlon, and I don't quote me on this, but we used to have a Satabria. I'm not sure if it's still in the club. Planes come and go.
You can go rent a plane and do some barrel roll.
Yeah, you can solo the Great Lakes. I get people that call me up, out of the blue and want to do aerobatics, and they ask me if they can do rent a solo aerobatic plane, and I say yes, and they're just shocked because if you're not familiar with the rest of the country, that is very rare, right?
And it's surprising here in San Diego because of the airspace. Where do you fly them at?
There's really 2 places we can practice legally. So there's a bunch of rules. You can't be around airways. You can't be around airports and airspace and over people, right? They don't want you doing aerobatics over a neighborhood for obvious reasons. So there's really 2 places we can fly. The north end of the El Cap Reservoir out there, that low-lying valley. And then down over Imperial Beach. Not over the actual land, but over the water there by Imperial Beach Pier.
Okay.
There's another little sliver of airspace.
You're flying over
there.
the water.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. So you said, okay, if you know how to land a tailwheel. So I've seen your plane taxi out. I've seen many, well, not a lot, because there's not a lot of them out there, actually.
Yeah.
But it's a big plane.
Yeah.
And one of the things I always notice is how the hell is the pilot seeing where the hell he's going when he's taxiing? Because your nose up. You know, you're at about a 30, 40 degree angle.
Yeah,
off
it's 20, 30 degree deck angle. Yeah, so you can't. If you're just rolling straight ahead, you're blind, right? The nose blocks your vision. So what we do are S-turns. You'll see us going back and forth like a worm, right? And that's exactly what we're doing, is just clearing the way ahead and then wiggling back the other way, clearing the way ahead, and we just keep doing that until we get where we're going. Because you never know when you're going to get cut off by a 172, a coyote, you know, a little grandma crossing the street, whatever it is. Sure. And you don't want to run
and hopefully
into
ground control's on their game.
Yeah, you know, but don't rely on them.
So you're literally clearing your path left to right, to right, because you can't. I watch them and I see their heads sitting out of the cockpit.
Yep.
And they're looking at the engine.
Yeah.
You know, the big, the nose of the airplane. I'm like, how do they taxi?
What's fun is in a 3-point landing. So there's 2 kinds of landings in tailwheels. You can land on the front 2 wheels first. We call that a wheel landing. Land the airplane level on those and then set the tail down. Or you can land on all 3 wheels at once. Call that a 3-point landing, which makes sense. But in the 3-point landing, you are blind. You're looking straight ahead and you don't see anything. You got to rely on your peripheral vision. And on narrow runways, if you see pavement, you're not on it.
On narrow runways, if you see pavement, you're not on.
Yeah.
So
you're off to the side in the dirt somewhere.
Really? So you're looking at the shoulder.
Yeah.
And that center line.
Yeah. It's that is sort of the challenge of transitioning to the Great Lakes in any kind of biplane, you know, where it's a rear seat solo. So the pilot in command, if you're flying the airplane by yourself, you sit in the back and then the passenger sits in the front. And the reason in biplanes that is the case is you have 2 wings and a bunch of weight that's further forward. So to balance the airplane out, the pilot has to sit further back than the front cockpit. You know, if you sat in the front, there would be too much weight towards the nose of the airplane, the thing would nosedive.
Nose
yeah,
forward.
so you got to sit in the back to balance out the weight. And in those airplanes, it can be a bit of a learning curve, right? Is learning to land a little blind. You don't have kind of the visual acuity that you used to if you're coming from a Piper or a Cessna, that kind of thing. But it can be done. I do it, and I'm not the world's greatest pilot. There's tons of people that do it, right? Everybody can learn to do it. It's just it's like any other thing in flying. It's another task to master, right?
Sure.
So don't be intimidated by it. It comes together. Yeah.
What is the difficulty in landing a tailwheel versus, besides the obvious not seeing where you're going, having to use your peripheral? Okay, let's say you got that down. I fly tricycle, you know, 3-wheel landing gear, typical, planes you see flying around, most of them. And it's hard. You know, that's one of the hardest things. The plane gets off the ground pretty easy.
Yeah.
Coming back, you know, pilots have a choice always to take off, but never a choice if they want to land or not. They're going to come down one way or another. And it's frustrating when you're a new pilot. It's one of those skills that at least I felt.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm going to get this until you get it. And you start figuring out how to properly set up and do those things. What's the biggest difference I would have to learn flying a standard trainer versus a tailwheel? And what would you have to teach me?
The biggest thing you got to learn is what your feet are for, right? Because the tailwheel is an unstable platform just by its very nature. And the reason for that is the CG, the center of gravity of the airplane, is behind the main wheels. And what that means is that the airplane constantly wants to flip around. Think about backing a trailer up behind a truck down the highway at high speed at 70 miles an hour. What's the trailer going to want to do? It's going to want to flip around, right? It's going to want to jackknife and come around. And tailwheels are like that as well because the CG, the center of gravity, is behind the main wheels. For your nose wheel airplanes, the opposite is true. The CG is ahead of the main wheels, so it is already flipped around. It's just rolling straight. The airplane wants to follow the CG, and everything's hunky-dory. So when you land, assuming there's no giant crosswinds or anything, you put the airplane down, you're in your landing rollout, you're kind of done. Right? You can kind of relax a little bit. You're not, steering the airplane so much. Maybe a little pressure here or there just to keep it on the center line, right? But the thing isn't trying to come around and whip the tail in front of you. In a tailwheel airplane, it is, right? And that's the difference, is that CG wants to flip so that the airplane is following the CG, just like the nose wheel. And your job as the tailwheel pilot is to not let it do that. So as you're landing and rolling out, the airplane gets more and more dangerous the slower it gets, which it strikes new tailwheel pilots by surprise because you come from the nose wheel world, right? The first part of the landing, the flare, getting the wheels on the ground, making that really nice greaser of a touchdown, all of that is very important. And you're super primed for it. But once you're just rolling out, right? Now you're like, all right, what am I doing for dinner? Where am I parking this thing? What's coming up? Did my wife text me? All this stuff.
The plane kind of handles itself.
You're letting your guard down a little bit, right?
Stay
exactly.
Where it's at.
And if you carry that over into the tailwheel world, the tailwheel will eat you alive because the thing gets more and more unstable the slower it gets during that landing rollout. The reason for that is when you touch down and you're moving at, say, 80, 90 miles an hour, you have a ton of airflow over the tail. Over the rudder, especially, which lets you have very good controllability, right? You press the rudder pedal, you got a lot of air flowing over the rudder, so you get very nice responsiveness. But as that airplane slows down in the landing rollout, now it's moving maybe 30 miles an hour. Now you got a lot less airflow over the tail, which means your rudder is much less effective than it was earlier, which means that it's harder to control the airplane as the thing slows down. And that last few seconds, just before you're above taxi speed, that last few seconds, maybe 5 seconds there, where you're just above taxi speed, you're just finishing your landing rollout, that's where most ground loops happen. A ground loop is when the tail actually does flip around, the airplane loops itself on the ground, usually scrapes a wingtip, damages the plane. That's where most of them happen, is that few seconds right above taxi speed, because the airplane is naturally less stable. And the pilot is probably a little off of his game, right? He's just relaxed a little prematurely. He's thinking about, I'm going to make this turn off the runway, instead of concentrating on keeping the damn thing from flipping around. And that is the big challenge in tailwheel flying, right? In nose wheel aircraft, the aircraft just lands and goes where you want it to. In tailwheel flying, you have to manage the airplane. You're constantly at war with the thing, right? That's what I tell my students before, on short final, just before we're going to touch down, when I'm teaching tailwheel students, I tell them, all right, we're going to war. Warm up your feet, right? Get your feet ready, because it's constant little stabby inputs on the rudders to keep the thing rolling straight.
Now, is the steering mechanism the tail wheel?
Yeah, so there's two things. You have the rudder, which is obviously going to control. And then as you set the tail wheel down and roll out on it, most tail wheels have a steerable tail wheel. They're hooked by chains to the actual rudder itself. There's a little arm that comes off the rudder. And so when you press the rudder pedal, you also pull a chain on the tail wheel, and it pulls that tail wheel one way or the other and steers, right? But that only works if your tail wheel is on the ground and touching the runway. So if you make that wheel landing we talked about, where you touch down on the mains only, the tail wheel is not on the ground, so it has no steering. What's steering you is the rudder, the air over the rudder. Once you set that wheel down and pin it to the runway, now you've got a steerable tail wheel. But not all tail wheels have that. For example, the Panzel didn't. It has a locking tail wheel. It could either be locked straight or totally free castering, like the wheel on a shopping cart.
So you're using brake differential to turn it?
Sometimes in the Panzel, it kind of rolled. You would land with it locked and it would just roll straight, right? And then you would unlock it to taxi, which worked great. Panzel has a big rudder and nice lot of airflow from this giant prop at the front, so it worked great. Other airplanes, yes, you do need to use differential braking. A famous one there is the Stearman, right? Stearman biplane. If you've seen those flying around, they're the kind of, imagine the crop duster from like Independence Day, the guy who's like, up yours. He was flying around in a Stearman, early on in the movie, the crop dusters. And those airplanes are famous for having just a little window in the middle of the landing rollout where it's sort of uncontrollable any other way than differential braking, because the tail wheel isn't quite down yet. The rudder is small and it doesn't have enough airflow anymore. The airplane's very big. The landing gear are very close together, so it's unstable by design. Fun fact, the original design from Boeing had the landing gear spaced further apart, and the Navy was like, hey, can we get these a little closer together so that the airplane is harder to use? Because they were using it to train military pilots. And so they made the landing gear closer together, which made the airplane less stable.
On purpose.
On purpose. And so, the Stearman is kind of famous as being this airplane that can be a handful to land, a tailwheel airplane that can be a handful. And differential braking is one way Stearman pilots use to control it throughout the landing rollout. But, as long as what I tell people is, don't be intimidated by tailwheels, right? These were the original airplanes. This was how airplanes were made back in the day. In fact, when Cessna first introduced the tricycle gear, they called it the Autoland. They called it the Autoland system because now you would no longer have to fight the airplane on landing, right? But what I tell people is don't be intimidated. It's like learning to drive a stick car.
I was going to say stick shift versus automatic.
Exactly. Anybody can do it. It's a matter of getting good instruction and then practice,
So take somebody who's, got some decent hours under their belt, but not a tailwind. What's the average transition period to go from a fixed gear tricycle plane to a tailwheel?
It's usually about anywhere from 6 to 10 hours is about the average, in that, if you fly consistently. And all of that is just going to be landings. In the air, a tailwheel airplane is exactly the same as a nose wheel. There's no difference, right? It's all when the wheels are touching the pavement is what we're concerned about. And so we just beat up the pattern for 6 to 10 hours and just do dozens and dozens of landings. And just like driving stick, if you've ever learned to drive stick, right? You start on the hill was always the challenge, right? You're on a hill, coming from a dead stop. You got to get the timing down, let the clutch out, gas. Too much clutch, you stalled, right? Same deal with learning to fly a tailwheel. Eventually, it just clicks. And then it comes together and you're like, oh, this is, I don't understand why I had so many problems starting on the damn hill,
Why would somebody who doesn't fly a tailwheel learn to fly a tailwheel?
Oh my God, because it will exponentially accelerate your stick and rudder skills, right? If you want to learn to fly an airplane if you want to be able to handle, 30 knot crosswinds and tackle all of these like the power off 180 for the commercial certificate, right? That's sort of the dreaded thing, for commercial students is you got to pull the power, beam the numbers. So you're flying, if this is the runway, you're flying parallel to the runway, the opposite direction. You got to pull the power and then make a 180-degree approach to land, and you got to hit a spot. So you tell your examiner, all right, I'm going to land on the numbers of the runway. And if you land 100 feet beyond that, you fail, right? So it's super stressful for commercial students. If you have tailwheel experience, that becomes a non-issue. You're just used to it.
Now, I see a lot of tailwheels biplanes do short approaches or do when you're flying a standard pattern, you're heading downwind, you'll pass your runway going opposite direction, a certain amount of distance. You'll make a 90-degree turn, fly your crosswind to your base.
Yep.
And then you'll make your base, and you've got a half a mile or a mile out or whatever it is, whatever the situation is, it varies. I see these people come in on these planes and they get to the threshold and they're just cutting it in. They're coming in tight.
Yeah.
Is there a reason for that?
Part of it is the Great Lakes does not glide well. The saying for the biplanes is if you want to establish the proper power off glide attitude in a biplane, throw out a brick and follow the brick down. When you get on the ground, don't forget to duck so you don't get hit by the brick. That's the saying for proper glide. They come out of the sky with an extreme vengeance, right? The Pitts is famous for that. Little aerobatic biplane comes out of the sky like a rock. The Extra, believe it or not, comes out of the sky very quickly because these airplanes they're not designed to be efficient. They're not designed to be like the Cirrus where it is designed to motor in cross country. It's designed to be maneuverable and do things suddenly and present well to judges. And so the wing is big and thick and very inefficient, which lets it pull all this G and lets it maneuver and carve through the air really well, but is not great for glide performance. And so these airplanes, they come out very quickly. And so if you're flying them, it behooves you to maintain your altitude as long as possible so that if something fails, you have more options, right? If I am coming in my biplane and I have 2 whites and 2 reds on the PAPI, a standard 3-degree glide slope angle, and then I lose my engine, I'm going to be in the homes somewhere short of the runway.
It drops that fast.
It drops that fast.
You want to hear something funny is I've always been told, and you just dispelled this rumor, that the 2 wings give it a further glide path.
No,
And it's just the opposite.
Yeah, more drag. You got all these
Sure.
wires that attach the wings like cables on a bridge. You got more drag because you got more stuff.
So it's actually
in the slipstream.
safer to do a short field or to do a short field landing like that.
We teach all our students to use a power off approach to land, right? So we hold our altitude until we can pull the power to idle and set a nice steep approach profile towards the runway.
I do notice they come in steep too.
Yeah. Yep. Part of that is we want to hold our altitude so that if something happens, we have a more range that we can make, more highways available, more open fields that we could potentially put the airplane down at. But the other part of it is, again, you're sitting in the back. So if you're coming in at that 3-degree glide slope angle that you're used to in a Cessna 172 and you're using some engine power to kind of haul the airplane to the runway, you're blind. You can't see anything. Whereas if you hold your altitude and then you pull the power to idle and you set a nice steep approach, now you have much better visual acuity on the runway, right? You can see in front of you, and if your passenger is sitting in front of you, you're kind of staring at the back of their skull, right? And you can still kind of make out the runway beyond them, which is great. That's a safer place to be than sort of low and blind just hauling the airplane in. And the other thing that I tell people is if you ever have to do this for real, right? You're out flying someday, not in an airport, you're just on a cross country or you're in a field doing aerobatics, whatever it is, and you lose the engine. You're going to have to put that airplane down off airport somewhere. And you are automatically going to default to the way you've done it 1,000 times in the past, right? Because your adrenaline is spiking, your fine muscle control is gone, all of your, higher order decision-making functions are now impaired. You're in fight or flight mode, no pun intended. And, you're basically reduced to an operating chimpanzee in an airplane, right? Your lizard brain is taking over. And you're naturally just going to set the sight picture that you're used to. So if you're used to that 3-degree glide slope angle where you have to use engine power to haul the airplane in, that's what you're going to default to in times of high stress. And then you're going to come up short of whatever field you were aiming at. It's much better to train yourself to use that. If every approach you fly is a power off, nice steep approach to land, then when you don't have the engine, that's fine because you're used to not having the engine for your approach. So you set up for your field, choose your field, you set up your glide just like you would if for any other landing. And now, your odds of success are probably higher. Hopefully anyway, that's the logic.
Yeah. In flight training, for anyone who's thinking about doing it, repetitive. Yep. These emergency procedures, these things that you do in controlled environments, you have to almost do it instinctually in the emergency. When I had that downwind situation in Big Bear, I can't literally say, I said, okay, what I need to do now is get full power, get my nose down, get as much air over my left wing so I can get some lift on it, stay along the runway before I start pulling back. None of that goes through your head. I just did it.
Yeah.
Maybe it was luck, but I think it was a lot of training. I'm a very safe pilot, and I would practice in safe, controlled areas. I had a really good instructor as well.
Yep.
And we practiced emergencies over and over again because his biggest fear, like I said earlier, is I'm not here when an emergency happens, and how are you going to be able to handle that? Well, that's exciting, Brian. I'm going to have to talk to the wife about that. The
tailwheel, I mean, it's more than that, right? Because in the tailwheels, they're very unforgiving of crosswinds, for example.
I can imagine,
yeah,
right?
they're basically giant weather vanes.
It's a weather vane,
at the top of a barn. So, if you land a nose wheel in a little crosswind, not like a 30-knot crosswind, but you got like a 10 to 12-knot crosswind, and you land the nose wheel and you're a little crabbed into the wind, and you touch down like that, you side load the gear. It's not great, right? But what does the airplane do? It kind of lurches and then just rolls straight. The same thing, you do that in a tailwheel, the airplane is already kind of crabbed into the wind, so the CG is going this way. When those wheels touch, the CG wants to continue the way it was going, right? Newton's law says, hey, things in motion want to keep going in motion. And all of a sudden, this airplane is not going to straighten itself and track straight. It's going to want to ground loop immediately, right? It's going to want to throw its tail around.
Slam your wing into the ground.
Yeah. So you've got to be on your game, right? The tailwheel is less forgiving of sloppy flying technique, which is great because it gets rid of sloppy flying techniques. If you go and fly
this
tailwheel.
improves your standard trainer type
yes,
or
you take
three-wheel.
that back to the nose wheels, and now every nose wheel crosswind landing you make is perfect.
Which is
because
always
they have to be perfect in a tailwheel.
Which is always a frustrating. Well, anxiety lifter because we get such a consistent westerly wind off the ocean here, and then all of a sudden you're flying in, you got a crosswind. You're like, okay, how do I make sure I don't screw this thing up?
Very nice weather in San Diego, and then you go fly in Texas or the Midwest somewhere, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm sorry, the ADA says you're coming into the airport, and the automated weather broadcast says, 30 knot crosswind, and you're like, I'm sorry, what? Mm-hmm. You don't have fuel to go anywhere else now, right? You got to put this thing down. That tailwheel experience, it pays off. It's just like learning to drive a stick. Then you get somewhere one day and somebody's says, oh, my car's a stick and I need you to drive it because I broke my leg. You're prepared. You got the experience.
So one of the things that was surprising to me when I was a young guy going, hey, I want to get my pilot's license, is I went out to the school, expressed my interest. They signed me up, and an hour later I'm in an airplane in the air.
Yeah, they get you fast.
They get you fast. They get you up in the air fast. So people out there, the guy or girl out there that is like, hey, it's something I've always wanted to do. Is it achievable? Well, it's expensive. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure your finances are in order before you start, because the longer it takes and the more you have to save during the process, the more expensive it is, because it is a practice type situation. But walk the new student through the experience. What are the day one to pilot's license, that experience, and what they should be looking forward to?
So, the day one is you show up and you say, I want to learn to fly. And you can do that at +1, right? You can, if you go to +1flyers.org, we have a list of instructors that you can browse through, and everybody has a little bio, right? And some photos and things. And you can choose one, call them up and say, hey, I want to learn to fly. You just cold call them. And they'll fall all over themselves to help you out, right? Or recommend, if they're busy, they'll recommend, another instructor that you can reach out to. And there's over 200 instructors at +1, so tons of resources there. If you're anywhere else in the country, local airports are a great place to start. Just walk in and say, I want to learn to fly. And the community is really great.
The pilot community is outstanding.
Don't think that sometimes they get people who are shy, or they think, oh, I'm a newbie, everybody's gonna hate it, kind of like the video game industry where being a newbie is sort of looked down on. It's the exact opposite in aviation, right? Everybody wants to help you out. Everybody wants to stumble all over themselves to get you in the door and get you going, partly because aviation itself is sort of on this decades-long downward trend where it's so expensive now and fewer people are doing it, that we're just super happy anybody's interested at all. So,
well, is there still a pilot shortage?
So it's interesting because right now the airlines are kind of overcorrecting for some of the hiring they did. So they've kind of cooled off a little bit. There's some furloughs going on. Spirit just furloughed a bunch of pilots. But I think that's just the ebbs and flows of the market, right? And I think it's still a very good career. Even if you don't go to the airlines, there's plenty of other cool flying to do. There's corporate flying, which sometimes pays even better than the airlines. There's, like fire flying, where you're flying to dump water on forest fires. There's all kinds of
first
flying
responders.
Jobs. Yeah, so plenty of things to do if you want to find a way to make money in aviation, right? But getting back to your question, contact the CFI, tell them you want to learn to fly. They're going to be super helpful for you. And then, what it looks like is your first few lessons are going to be very intimidating because you're scared, right? It's very unfamiliar. Everything feels very nervous and oh my God, this thing is going to fall apart any second, right? It feels more rickety than your commercial airliners. But what you got to remember is these things are really actually pretty stout. They will come apart if you abuse them or you fly them into a hurricane or a thunderstorm. Don't do that. But they are really designed to take a beat.
And a good CFI will keep you out of those dangers.
Exactly. He's there to keep you roped in, the guardrails, if you will, to keep you safe. And after those first few lessons, you'll come one day and you'll be excited. The first few you're nervous, right? We're going flying. I don't know if this is for me. You're just nervous. And then, a handful of lessons down the line, you start to get excited about it. And now you've got enough knowledge and experience where you've kind of see that, all right, this is safe and this is something I can tackle and overcome. And then from there, flight instruction and learning gets really exciting, right? And you're looking forward to it every time you come out to the airport. So my advice is those first few lessons, just hang with it. That feeling of nervousness and apprehension is gonna go away once you've got a few hours and you're more used to the environment, and then you'll really start to enjoy it.
And once you get it, It's a tough bug to get rid of.
So the first few lessons, you're going to go up with an instructor. He's going to handle the landing for you, so you don't need to stress about that. He's going to teach you to fly straight and level, turns, climbs, descents, all the basic stuff. And then, you start doing takeoffs, which are very easy. Takeoffs, they're not intimidating at all. You apply the power, point the airplane down the runway, it'll fly. And then a little further down, you start working on stalls and slow flight. So,
Stalls were always the thing I feared.
Yeah.
And for those who don't understand, when we say stall, it isn't that the engine has failed. It's the lift across the wings that no longer is there, and the plane will literally just stop flying.
Well, it'll mush, right?
Mush.
So your lift doesn't drop to zero. It just goes below what can support the weight of the airplane. And so the airplane can no longer fly level. Some people think, if you stall the airplane, it's like a drop zone ride in an amusement park where you just whoosh, come straight down. And it's not like that. You know that. It just kind of shakes and mushes like this. But it's very intimidating the first few times.
The first few times it's very intimidating. After you understand the mechanics, like driving a stick shift, once you start understanding the timing and what's actually going to happen, there's a lot of things the plane will tell you.
You get warnings. You learn.
It's about ready to go, and you just know when it's going to happen. At first, it's a little intimidating. The one thing that I noticed I was very intimidated about, and other pilots or new pilots, is air traffic control, talking to air traffic control.
For sure, yeah.
What I recommend people to do, there's apps out there, but Live ATC is a fantastic free app.
Yep.
You can punch in most local airports. So if you're flying out of San Diego, you can punch up Montgomery Field or Gillespie, and you can just listen.
Yeah.
And you'll actually get to know some of the familiar voices from the towers.
Yep.
You'll hear great pilots. You'll hear students stumbling over their words, but more importantly, you'll start to hear the cadence.
Yep.
And that's something you can do even when you're not flying, and you'll start to understand what they're doing, what they're saying, why they're saying it. Because talking on the radios is intimidating for a lot of beginner pilots.
Absolutely. But the good news is there's standard phraseology, and there's only a handful of phrases that you'll hear ATC say, unless you're doing something stupid, and then
you don't want that phone call.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you take this phone number down, please?
Yeah. So the more you kind of listen to it, the more you recognize, all right, yeah, they're using this thing. I've heard this before, and it becomes sort of second nature. But don't be intimidated by talking on the radio. Yes, you're going to be slow, you're going to stumble, right? But the airports you're going to be flying at are not JFK in New York. There's no,
and they're not going to let you land there unless it's an absolute emergency.
Exactly. You're not holding up 17 American Airlines A330s, right, with your slow radio. You're flying at airports that are designed for teaching, for learning, for students who are learning, right? And your CFI won't let you kind of make an ass of yourself. If it's super busy, he'll jump on and help you out, right? But the only way you get better at it is by doing it. And so if you got to conquer the fear and you just admit, all right, I'm going to suck at this for a couple weeks, but then by God, I'm gonna get it.
That's it. You gotta make that first step. And the learning process, and fear is a function of a lack of not knowing.
Yeah.
So by learning and getting to know, you get past the fear, and then you're into the fun.
Yep.
And flying, although it's a huge responsibility, you said at the beginning, the freedom. Getting up there and flying, on a good flight, it's relatively uneventful, on a good cross-country flight, and that, basically is a flight, I think, over 50 miles, nautical miles or something like that.
Point A to point B.
I fly to Phoenix. It's a 2-hour flight, and, once I get out of San Diego airspace, it's pretty boring as far as, what you're doing. The plane is handling itself. A lot of these planes have autopilot.
Yep.
So, you get it configured properly. It means you're not doing nothing. You're monitoring radios, you're monitoring for traffic, and you're doing a lot of things. And there's a lot to do always, but it's peaceful.
Yes.
There's such a peace about it being up there. The view of the world, it'll change you're so used to being on the ground, and now you're flying over a beautiful city like San Diego. It's kind of like when you got your first bike and mom said you can go past 4 houses down the street.
Yeah, very similar.
And then you got your mountain bike, and now you can go take off for miles and that freedom. And then the first time you get your driver's license, well, now with the proper certifications and the proper plane, you can fly all over the United States.
Yep. Yeah.
What do you want to do today? Hey, let's go to Las Vegas. You're certified. You're a pilot. jump in the plane, do your proper flight planning, do your due diligence, and you're in Vegas. Instead of a 6-hour drive, you're there in a couple hours.
Yeah, it's great. So I have a 2-year-old daughter. She's the best decision I've ever made. But right behind that is learning to fly. Yeah.
Well,
that's the way I put it.
I would say anybody that thinks it's out of their grasp, get your finances in order.
Yep.
You know, when I did it 25, 26 years ago, or whatever it is, I don't even know, 2001, so someone can do the math. I think it cost me around $6,000.
Yeah. It's going to be a little bit more now. Probably closer to 12,000. 15, yeah.
Get the finances figured out first. It's not an impossible task. It's a lot of money, $12,000, $15,000. But the reward of the lifetime reward of being able to fly it's hard to explain unless you do it.
Yep. Yeah.
And the freedom.
I think it is definitely worth doing. You know, someday you're going to be on your deathbed, and you know, what are you going to want? Lifetime of memories, having good times in airplanes, or another $12,000 in your bank account? You know,
and if you have a fear of general aviation, study. Yeah. Study, you know, it's not macabre to study why some of these planes crash, and there are issues. Most are avoidable.
Yes.
These planes don't just fall apart and fall out of the sky because they decided that's what they want to do. They want to fly. They will fly themselves, and generally it's bad decision making. You're in control of that. There's a lot that you are in control of to keep yourself safe, keep yourself around for your loved ones. And have a good attitude, a humble attitude about it is really important. And be informed, have very strong personal limits. I have very strict personal limits when I fly because I don't have to.
Yeah.
So there's no reason for me to take any risk at all. Brian, thank you for your time. I mean, this is awesome. You gave me more time than I thought. But again, we could go all day talking about airplanes.
Oh, yeah. We've barely scratched the surface.
And I hope you'll come back.
For sure.
I guarantee you a lot of people will love this episode. Where can they find what you're doing lately?
So, +1flyers.org. Go there if you're looking to learn to fly. And if you're looking for aerobatics instruction, if you're in San Diego, give me a call. I'd be happy to fly with you. And then if you're not, go to IAC.org, International Aerobatic Club. IAC.org. There's a little link there that says get started, and they'll hook you up with an instructor in your local area. And everybody in IAC is really, really great. I know everybody from the president down, and it's just a great organization. And learn aerobatics that way. Don't find the crusty old guy with an RV who's like, oh yeah, I did some loops and rolls in Vietnam. I'll show you. Don't do that. That's not going to end well. Get the professionals that do it for real and to the standards that you want to learn.
Yeah, and these flying clubs, they have additional safety standards laid out by the FAA regarding maintenance and checks and things on these aircraft. And with the proper CFI, the proper aircraft, you're going to be in great hands, and you're going to have a blast in your life.
I'll tell you what, man.
Check off on your list.
Just if you do nothing else, just try seeing the world at the top of a loop for the first. I'm telling you, you're going to be hooked. It's amazing. You'd be like,
and if
what
you're
have I been
single, you
missing?
don't have to ask anybody. Do it now. Thanks,
Brian.
Brian.
Get into it before the marriage.
I really appreciate it, man. This has been fantastic. Great meeting you.
Great meeting you as well. Let's go fly together sometime.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Take care, Ryan.
You've been listening to Real People, Real Life. Our passion is to have real conversations with real people who've made it. Real people who've made it, who did it on their own terms. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, catch us on Twitter or X at RPRL Podcast and on YouTube at Real People, Real